When Mercedes-Benz first launched the second generation GLA here in Malaysia, I said that it was way overpriced for a car that was terribly under-equipped. Since then, it's gone from CBU to CKD, and as of March 2022, it's also been updated with a few more features. It's still the entry-level Mercedes-Benz crossover though, with a 1.3-litre Renault engine up front and a few more bits and bobs missing. But Mercedes-Benz is now confident that this is exactly where it wants its SUV lineup to begin. So have they finally nailed it? In this review, we'll find out. And before we get into it, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and hit the bell to be notified every time we make a new upload. Now with this second generation GLA, I feel like the biggest improvement is actually in terms of design. The GLA no longer looks like an A-Class with some steroids. Instead, it's got its own design with its own face and its own unique character, which I think fits this model rather well. Now this is the GLA200 progressive line, which means you get the black pin grille in a hexagonal shape with a single blade going across. You also get LED fog lights down here and a little bit of chrome down on the bottom to act as a bash plate, although obviously it's not actually a bash plate. Now, of course, that enormous grille is flanked by full LED headlights with automatic high beam. Now, these also come with naturally daytime running lights and LED indicators, which certainly make this car look rather snazzy. Now down the side, you get 18-inch alloy wheels wrapped in Continental Eco Contact tires, which improves fuel economy by reducing rolling resistance. However, that does mean there is some degree of compromise in terms of grip. And the 18-inch alloy wheels on this car, although they are a little smaller, because this is the progressive line car, it makes it look a little bit more rugged and off-road ready. You also get functional satin silver roof rails, so you can add a roof box or a bike rack should you want to. And there is more chrome down the side to emphasize the length of this car, which has grown some way compared to the previous generation model. At the back, you get full LED taillights with the typical Mercedes-Benz SUV squircle design. You also get a couple of fake exhaust exits down there, more contrast black cladding, and overall, as I said earlier, I think that the new generation GLA looks a lot better than the vehicle it replaces. Now, the new GLA is dimensionally larger in every measurable way, which means that does have some benefits in terms of boot space. So in addition to the kick to open function, that then reveals a much larger boot than before. This is in keeping with what you get from the BMW X1 and the Volvo XC40, though the Swede does have a little bit more space than this, but the rear seats do fold flat 40-20-40 for maximum usability. Although if you just want to maximize your boot space in here, this boot floor can be lowered just a little bit to maximize vertical space. But in this setting, it is a pretty practical thing. It's not that high, you have no load lip. There is a little bit of a lip on the bodywork for you to avoid, but aside from that, it's pretty useful. However, I would have preferred a few more features back here. There is no 12-volt socket, there are only two tie-down hooks, and most importantly, with the parcel shelf in this position, I cannot actually reach over to fold the seat, so I actually have to go down to the side to fold the seats flat, which is a little bit inconvenient because the competitors do a little bit better. Now, all that said and done, the GLA does so far present itself as a pretty decent compact crossover package. But does that extend to the interior? So far, so good. The design in here is certainly different from what we got from the previous generation GLA, and it now differentiates itself better from the A-Class upon which it's based. Although you still get the same MBUX system, which we'll touch on in a moment, and the turbine-style air vents, the more vertical orientation of the dash means that it feels very different compared to the hatchback and the saloon. And more importantly, you do get elements like these satin door handles here and the flatter door surface, which is kind of borrowed from the GLB, to make this car feel a little bit more rugged and expressive, which I kind of like. Now, we have to talk about MBUX. On the GLA200, it continues to be displayed on two 10.25-inch displays. You have one in the middle and one ahead of the driver, actually for instrumentation, and you continue to manipulate it via either this touchpad down here or this touchpad on the steering wheel, and the instrument cluster is controlled by this touchpad on the right. MBUX remains one of the most beautiful user interfaces to use or infotainment systems to use in the luxury segment, because all the graphics are excellent. It is very responsive. These screens are also very pixel dense, which means everything looks crisp and sharp with great contrast. In terms of intuitiveness of the UX, it's not quite as good as BMW's iDrive system, or not as direct as what you get from Volvo's XC40 Google automotive system, but it's still not that bad, and most importantly, it does come with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Rather irritatingly though, it's wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and the USB port is over here next to the wireless charging port, which obviously once you've plugged your phone in, won't fit there, which means you have to put your phone in here, and then you have this hideous cable which will then touch this touchpad and then manipulate the MBUX, and it just becomes a nightmare in and of itself. Now, that does bring me on to some of the new features for this update. So for starters, you get the 64 color ambient lighting system in here, like the GLA250, which certainly makes this interior feel a little bit more upmarket. You get that wireless charging pad now, and overall this interior does feel rather special, even if these seats are not genuine leather and you only get single zone climate control. At least you do get now twin powered front seats with memory function on both sides. The other thing that this car does not have, which I don't think any GLA has sans the GLA35AMG, is a heads-up display. Now, while that does seem like a very small nitpick, the fact that the MBUX screen sits so low means that I have to adjust my focus when I'm looking from the road to the information displayed and then back to the road. So I feel like it would have been slightly improved if either the screen was higher, which obviously they can't do because it's a single piece of glass, or if they had a heads-up display, which is available in other markets. The other thing that I wish they would have had is dual zone climate control. The reason for that is because the MBUX ambient lighting system in this car is so good, and it's so interactive where it will change the zones depending on which zone is raising or lowering their temperature. But because this car has single zone climate control, the whole car goes red or blue if it goes up or down. A bit of a shame. Now, because the GLA is larger in every dimension, it means that interior space at the rear has improved enormously. The front seats actually sit on these very high plinths in order to get the raised driving position that people want so much, and that means I have plenty of footroom for me to stretch out. And because the wheelbase on this car has been improved, I also get plenty of knee room, and of course I get plenty of headroom, much better than the first generation GLA. So all of this is pretty good. The doors do not open that wide, which means getting a child seat in and out of the car might be a bit difficult, but that said, the ISOFIX mounts are very easy to locate, which means once you get past the tiny doors, it'll be easy for you to install the child seat in here, and a rear-facing child seat should have plenty of clearance as far as I can tell. Now we have to talk about the drawbacks, however. Number one, this rear half of the cabin doesn't come with any aircon vents whatsoever, not on the floor, not in the center, not on the B-pillars, which in our market could be a little bit uncomfortable. You also only get one USB-C port down there, which I feel is a little bit disappointing. I would have liked to have seen at least two. And lastly, there is no central armrest in here, which means I only have bottle holders here in the doors. There are no cup holders. You do get these airplane style nets on the back of the front seats, but I wouldn't put my cup in that, if you know what I mean. And lastly, because the GLA is a crossover, the shoulder line is a little bit high, which means if I were a toddler, which I can morph into without too much difficulty because I'm short, it means that my visibility out of the window is rather compromised, which means a child could get car sick in here rather quickly. And as for adults, you can't recline the rear seats, so if you want to slouch, you have to sit like this. Mercifully, however, the GLA does redeem itself in other ways, mostly by the way it drives, so let's hop into the front seat and get going. So under the bonnet of the GLA200 is a 1.33-litre 4-cylinder turbocharged engine, which puts out a healthy amount of horsepower and torque, with power going to the front wheels via a 7-speed dual-clutch automatic. Now this is slightly different from the 2-litre, because the 2-litre 4-cylinder is actually a Mercedes-Benz engine, although that is also paired to a dual-clutch auto. Now the thing is, this is not the first time I've driven Mercedes-Benz with this engine. In the GLB200 review, which you can watch in this corner, I mentioned that the car felt it was adequately powered, but it didn't have quite the excess that I would expect from a luxury car. Now, I'm honestly a little bit surprised that the experience is not the same in the GLA200, because this car somehow fits a little bit better with this engine. Sure, it's not the torquiest, nor is it the most powerful, and sure, when you're cruising on the motorway, you can't really maintain speeds in excess of 120 kilometers an hour. At least it starts to protest a bit after that. So, of course, more power would be nice, but we have to remember the GLA200 is primarily aimed at people who will be spending most of their time in town, and for that this engine is very perky and it's very responsive. There is a little bit of turbo lag, but once the turbo does kick in, you've got a decent amount of torque in order to help you through cut and thrust traffic, and it will keep you up at motorway speeds when you're traveling between the suburb that you live in to town where you work. On top of that, because this is the 200, it's got these smaller 18-inch alloy wheels wrapped in nice thick tires, which means that the primary ride in this car is pretty excellent. It isolates you from the road and it isolates you from the very worst lumps and bumps. Of course, it's not to say that this car is wallowy, because in reality this car drives pretty well. To say that it's a driver's car would be a bit of a misnomer. The GLA200 is a competent vehicle to drive. It drives a certain neutrality, which I think a lot of people will quite enjoy. And of course, because this car is front-wheel drive, it does mean that it's rather predictable, at least for people who are, say, upgrading from a front-wheel drive mass-market car, moving into one of these, it will feel quite natural to them. Now, it's not to say that everything the GLA200 does is good, because there are certain areas where I feel like this car could improve. The GLA200 suffers from the same issue as a lot of other lower-end Mercedes-Benzes, which is namely quite a lot of noise intrusion, both from the tires as well as from the wind. Now, it's not as irritating as what you'd get out of a Proton X50, where you have a very distinct whistling sound, but it's louder. And when you're driving and cruising at high speed over a long distance, this sort of constant din will become a little bit irritating and somewhat tiring. And then there's the fact that this car doesn't come with any sort of major active safety systems. You get autonomous emergency braking, pre-collision warning, blind spot monitoring, and lane keep assist, which was an upgrade for this year. But you still don't get the full level 2 semi-autonomous systems as you would from, say, the Volvo XC40, which means that if you do want a car that can do the majority of the work for you and take away the strain when you're driving long distance, then you'd be better served by the Volvo. The Volvo also does a better job in terms of motorway cruising, not just because it is a slightly quieter car and slightly more refined car, it's also significantly more powerful than the GLA200, which means that you will be hearing less of that engine straining when you're trying to maintain highway speeds. And then lastly, there comes the fact that this car does not come with adaptive beam lights, where, you know, as some people call them, matrix LEDs. Because again, the Volvo XC40 does offer them, and this car doesn't even offer it even on the GLA250. But we are talking about really minor things here. If we look at the GLA as a whole, compared to the outgoing GLA, this car is now more comfortable, more practical, it's better equipped, and I'd argue it's also better looking. And the thing is, the GLA is one of those cars that I have never recommended in the past and would never have recommended in its previous generation. But driving around in this car, it's sort of changed my mind. I kind of see where the GLA sits in the lineup, and I also understand how it exists within that context. And compact luxury crossovers are a very hot commodity at the moment, and there's no doubt that with the flash items like the beautiful MBUX screen, the 64-color ambient lighting system, and the pretty decent audio system in this car, it will appeal to the younger, more energetic and more youthful buyers that Mercedes-Benz has in mind. Of course, I would have liked it if this car was a little bit quieter, because for a lot of people, luxury is measured by refinement and quietness and NVH levels, and I feel like that is where this car drops the ball most. But it is certainly better than the previous generation car, but I just keep thinking that it could have been better still, if only they had just focused a little bit more effort. But nothing can be perfect, so would I recommend the GLA200? Absolutely. This is a fantastic car for people who want to be seen in something flashy, especially if you're spending the majority of your time in town. But if you want a slightly more capable, compact luxury crossover with more power, better driving dynamics, and a more comprehensive suite of active safety systems, please consider the Volvo XC40. If you want something that is even more environmentally friendly, then consider the Mercedes-Benz EQA, or again the Volvo XC40 EV, as both of these cars offer the same practicality, somewhat, just without an engine, and so it's got all the benefits that electric driving brings with it. And of course, if you don't like either of these cars for whatever reason, don't forget that there is also the Audi Q3, which is significantly more expensive, or the BMW X1. But in any case, that's been our review of the Mercedes-Benz GLA200 progressive line. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon so you're notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe. Jangan bodoh.